why investing is important. Absolutely, absolutely. And another reason why a lot of people might not think about it is, combating inflation. Because when you have your money sitting in cash, you're essentially actually losing money because what you could buy with $10, a few years ago is not the same thing what you could be buying today because everyone has really faced inflation, especially this year overall with the rising prices. So if you're having it sitting cash and your money is not growing, you're essentially just really losing money. Reaching your financial goals, to many of you are pointing out retirement. Yes, we cannot, that is the one thing we cannot take out a loan for is retirement. Because once you're done working, you have a finite amount of income that's going to come in. And that's from the investments you have, and then, whatever real estate or whatever other source of income you have built up, Social Security, but it's very finite. You're not going to be able to really grow it so much now because your time limit, your time horizon has also significantly decreased as well. But then another reason investing is really important is taking advantage of taxed advantaged accounts overall. You having access to the types of accounts that are available to you overall in order to grow your wealth. And of course, building your legacy, being at PNC for 10 years and seeing all that generational wealth funnel through. I worked on trusts that were, from the 60s, from the 80s, where, grandparents, great grandparents, they built this wealth for their grandchildren, for their children, to funnel education costs, to make sure their kids are set up for the future. There's many ways where you can really use your wealth positively as well. So you might be thinking, so how can I grow my wealth? What are the types of investment accounts I can have that I would use halal investments in? One of the most basic one is a brokerage account. A brokerage account is basically, it's a taxable brokerage where, you open up like a Robinhood or a M1 or a Vanguard, whatever it is. You just open a taxable account and then you put in, let's say $100, you gross to $200. Now you have a gain on that $100 that you pay taxes on. That's basically, you have your gains and losses on that type of brokerage account. There's no restrictions to that. You can take out the money whenever you want. You can put in money whenever you want. There's no limits to this. A traditional IRA is more in the sense of where there is a limit in the tax deferred growth you have. It is a tax deferred account. So the money you put in it today, you do get a deduction on your taxes depending on your income level, where that money will grow all tax free. And then actually, it's not tax free, it's tax deferred. And then when you pull that money out in retirement, you pay taxes on what you have withdrawn. But the entire amount that's growing, that you're not paying taxes on that. Same thing with the Roth IRA, where it is after-tax account. You don't get any deductions on it upfront because it is after taxes. So it's basically from your net paycheck, from your net money, but that money grows tax-free and you withdraw it tax-free as well. So you never pay taxes on the same money twice. So that's a Roth IRA. So those are two different vehicles. But the government has put a limit on that on an annual basis. So for 2024, if you're under 50 years old, the maximum you can put in a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA, depending on your income limits, the maximum you can put away is $7,000. So now what is a rollover IRA or what is a rollover Roth IRA? This is something that you can actually create from your previous employer. So let's say, for example, myself, I was at PNC. So when I came into Zenith, I could take my 401k and then I could roll it over into an IRA. So it's still in a tax advantaged account, but now it's an IRA. So basically, you have a rollover IRA or a Roth rollover IRA, and it grows the same way a traditional IRA would, or the same way a Roth IRA would. But those monies are also growing for you in a tax-free way as well.
Okay, so we do have a question in the chat. How much should you save or invest for retirement?
That's a really, really great question. And you know what? The answer really is in the sense of like what your needs are. What do you want to do what do you want to do in retirement? For example, how much you should save for retirement is very different from a person to person. So someone who wants to retire at 50 and they're 20 years old right now, they're going to have to save very aggressively in order to retire at 50 versus someone who's 20 and wants to retire at 70. They're gonna maybe they don't have to be that aggressive because they have a really long time horizon. But it also depends on how your expenses look. How do they look today? How are they going to look in retirement? Some people are like, I'm young now, I'm going to enjoy life now. And so they're like really spending lavishly. But there are some people who are like, I'm going to be frugal now because I really want to enjoy retirement and I don't want to worry about my money. So this is a very individual led question where in the sense, how much should you have saved? Because it really depends on um, the person and your lifestyle overall. Okay, so in terms of investing for your future, so what does that look like? So basically, we're coming back to this time horizon piece, right? Where let's look at this example of Fatima and Ali, where Fatima is 25, right? And she saves on an annual basis $10,000 a year for 40 years until retirement. And then Ali is like, you know what? I wanted to pay off my student loans. I wanted to make sure, I have a house. And he's like, I'm just going to get my stuff done. And when I'm ready, I'm going to get started. And he got ready at 40. So he was putting money away as starting 40 years old, but he was putting 20,000, right? So he's putting twice the amount as Fatima. But if you look at the graph actually where Ali is blue and Fatima is read where she actually has more than $1 million saved. And even though she put in less, she had a longer time horizon. And that is your best friend when it comes to retirement. And I'm not saying if you're 40 years old, you should feel discouraged and it's like, man, I'm already too late. Why am I going to do this? That doesn't necessarily mean like you shouldn't start investing because at the end of the day, the best time to start investing is now and how much you need and how you need to really tailor your lifestyle overall. It really depends on the lifestyle you are living right now and the lifestyle you want to lead later on in retirement. And this is also a great time to speak to a financial planner, right? Figuring what is your number, what type of lifestyle do you want, and how do you get there, and what type of risk do you need to take, what type of time horizon do you need to take. We have clients all the time who are like, I want to retire at 60. But a lot of times we're like, 60 might not be ideal, but 65 works. And this is how much you need to set aside. And sometimes it's as little as saving an additional percent in their 401k. They're putting away 4% right now. If they just do an additional 5% or I mean additional 1% for the total of 5%, sometimes that works. And sometimes unfortunately it doesn't. Okay, so now you guys also might be thinking about, okay, this is great. I should invest, but how do I make sure my investments are halal? Because as a Muslim, that is our biggest struggle when it comes to investments overall. Is like, how do you make sure your investments stay halal? And that is something, honestly, I struggled with a lot, which is one of the reasons why I'm also in this field as well, is, I understand money overall and because of the time and my duration in this field, I've realized that it's not necessarily impossible, but you just have to be very conscious. So when I was looking, there really wasn't a lot of options overall. So I was really the best option you really did have was cherry picking individual stocks because you didn't have any other way to make sure your investments were halal if you didn't go into individual stock holdings. So right now there are options where you can invest through Wahed or Amana, and many of you may have heard about them. If you have not, please know that they are out there. If you're someone who's like, I want to do investments, I don't really want to work with a professional, I just kind of want to do my own thing, you can just buy their ETF and call it a day, and at least you'll be investing, and they're taking care of on the back end, whether it's halal or not. So Wahed, they are the creator of the HLAL ETF, which is basically the S&P 500 without the haram. And then they have the Ummah ETF, which is more of an international exposure. And then Amana, many of you may have heard about them as well. They have mutual funds where they are they have funds where it's like basically you tell them what you want, and then they have like a growth portfolio or just income driven, or they have just like international exposure. So there's just like a set fund that you invest in, and it's not tailored to you. There is a small minimum as well. I believe it's like $100 or $500 overall, but it's not necessarily a lot, but you can also get started with them. Okay. And so now we're talking about how is Zenith different, right? And so what's really important is making sure your portfolios are diversified overall. So as you can see here on the left side, so let's take a look at that. You can see that the GPA is 4.0. Now, what does that mean? Of course, we all want a 4.0, right? So when we go ahead and look at our portfolios and curate them, we want this number to be as high as possible overall. So what we're showing you here is the portfolios that we have created. This one, the example, as you can see, the blue line, that is our portfolio, that one of our 100% equities and how well it has done overall. The expected return is about 10% on this portfolio. And I also really want to tell you guys, it's a full disclosure. I mean, past performance is not indicative of future results. So overall, you can see in the past 3 years how these portfolios have performed. So we're comparing against the S&P 500. The gray is how the S&P 500 has done in the past 3 years. The pinkish is actually the Amana Growth Fund, which is their 100% equities. The green is the Halal ETF for Wahid, and blue is how our portfolio would have performed if you were invested in this in the past 3 years. So that's where diversification is really key overall. If we go over to the next slide, Rihanna. So one thing that we actually created and curated overall is like, how are we going to be different, and how can we make sure we're achieving that diversification? And what we noticed is whether it's Amana, whether it's Wahid, it was basically mostly in large cap stocks. So for example, we're looking at your Googles, your Apple, where they're large companies where they have more than $10 billion in their market cap, where everything was really in large cap, but the real opportunity is also really coming from mid cap as well. And there wasn't any exposure to it. And because, we will have to say halal, we're not invested overall in any of these ETFs. They don't obviously have the financial exposure, like you don't have the banks and you don't have industrials overall. Like, so there's a lot of sectors that we're missing, which is why it doesn't have that overall diversification. So what we created is we combined the available ETFs that are out there, but we also created a proprietary set of funds, set of stocks that also give that additional exposure, where you're having growth in your portfolio, you're also having the income come in, but you're also having exposure in the different types of sectors that you're not getting from the ETFs that are just pre-made overall, and they're not customized whatsoever. They're just being run on the back end. And how do we make sure that we're screening it appropriately? So, full disclosure on the end that I'm not an Islamic scholar. So you might be wondering, so for me, how do you guys know what is halal, what is not? So we go through Zoya. So Zoya uses their own screening process overall. And I'll come back. Actually, great. We'll go back to that both ways. So we actually use Zoya for our screening. So they use a Bahrain-based Sharia compliant board. It's called the AOFI standard. So what they do is they are using their set of rules on seeing whether a company is compliant or not. So they rate it either compliant, questionable, or non-compliant. And we use Zoya for our screening process. So we make sure, is it whatever we're looking at, whatever holdings we're invested in, is it compliant in Zoya? And is it questionable? And if it is, what is questionable about it? And we look at how are their business activities, because it has to be that they cannot have more than 30% of their income coming from interest-based earnings. And they also have to make sure they're not in that business where they're in the way their business is invested, not more than 30% of their revenue is also coming through any non-compliant means also. So they're doing their screening, and we just use them to make sure, our what we're recommending is staying halal. So if we could go back to the previous screen, Rihanna. Great, thank you. So we go through them, we make sure, if it's compliant, and then we create your custom portfolio. So you might already have a portfolio where you already started investing, and now you're like, I don't have the time. I'm not sure if it is halal, and I don't know if these are good investments. So I have many clients who already have their investments that they already have started. And then if they're good holdings, we're holding on to them. If they're not, then we're getting rid of them because they're not compliant or they're bad performing individual holdings also. So we're creating that custom portfolio for you, but then we also make sure we're monitoring on a quarterly basis to ensure that your portfolio is staying halal. And that is the hardest part about halal investments overall, because there's a lot of volatility in the markets, right? So how do you make sure your investments are staying halal? So what we do is we look at it on a quarterly basis. If one quarter it's really like, because there's been volatility in the market, we keep it on the watch list. And then if next quarter again, it's coming up as non-compliant, we boot it from our portfolio and then replace it with something else. So how do you make sure, what is the right amount of risk for you overall, and how do you maximize your returns, right? So when it comes to investments, the risk tolerance is the biggest thing, because some people, when they start investing, they really lose sleep over what they're invested in. And some people are like, you know what, I don't really care. I don't, I could put all my money in Bitcoin and it doesn't really bother me. So understanding where you are in life and how much risk tolerance you have is really, really key. And then the other thing is don't be afraid of market volatility overall, right? You want to make sure you're staying consistent, because when we looked at that example of Fatima and Ali, it's regardless of how the market was doing overall, they kept on investing. And there's going to be some years where you're maybe even at a loss. Maybe you're just making 2-3%, but there's going to be some years where you're making 30-40%. So overall, it's a really great way to kind of just train yourself also, is like, what amount can I actually start with where I'll be comfortable? So whatever that amount is, for some people that could be $100, for some people it could be $1,000. But if you also think about, when do I need that money? If there is volatility and you see your performance and your portfolio has gone down a little bit, now do you need that money right now? If you don't need it, if your goal is for retirement, don't worry about it. Just keep on investing and keep on making sure that your investments are being diversified appropriately. And that's really key, is making sure your portfolio is diversified, because you don't want to have this seesaw effect where everything is in one portfolio. And we've seen so many times where clients are all invested in tech. And of course, tech had a really great run, right? But now, as it's going up, you're getting all the gains. But when there's volatility, you're also getting all the losses. So overall, you don't want to be overexposed in any sector. You want to make sure you have a good diversification where there's not such a huge seesaw effect. And then staying long term in terms of focusing on your goals overall, that's really key. That's the best way to maximize your returns overall, is staying invested, making sure you can tolerate the risk, making sure you're in good diversified holdings, and then, just kind of going through it for the long run. And you'll be okay, inshallah.
I do just have a quick question for you, talking about diversification. How do you recommend diversifying a halal investment portfolio?
How do you diversify?
Yes.
Great question. So for example, if you want to go back to the screen, we're comparing the different performances. Yeah, like for example, so if you go right here and then actually look at I know we're getting a little bit technical, but if you look at that Sharpe ratio, just on an overall basis, right? You want that number to be as high as possible. Where you can see on the halal, the HLAL in that green, that's 0.55. Where on the Amana, you can see that's 0.43. That's meaning that it's more of the portfolio is swaying in one way. Where you can see in the the halal in the blue line overall, that's 0.8, that's closer to 8. So meaning that as one side or one sector is going up, that doesn't mean the entire portfolio is moving that way. So that's the best way to diversify your portfolio is making sure you have exposure in all different types of sectors and funds overall. You don't want it to be all in one industry. You don't want it to be all in consumer, cyclicals or communication or even tech. You don't want it all in one field. You want to have different types of ratios in each of them so you're not facing so much volatility overall.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
I think there was a question in the chat that was asked earlier. So how much would you say is a good amount to invest for a first-time investor?
It's a really good question. So it really de what depends, right? There's different factors that come into this. And what we're looking at is how old are you, right? Do you have any other types of investments? Or this is kind of just like your play money. So if your goal is this is something that I need for retirement, I just want to get started right now, you might need to be a little bit more aggressive if you don't have any savings. But if you're someone who're like, I just want to just start on my own and see, you could start with a couple $100 and take it from there. But it might be a good idea to speak to a professional if you're just getting started and your goal is to start saving for retirement and you don't have anything yet. You definitely should be getting a second set of eyes in terms of what you need, what your goals are, and what that number is for you specifically.
Love that. Do you want to? There was also another question. I just wanted to get to this slide. But one question that was asked earlier in the chat as well is just making sure that halal investments do not have any interest accruing on them.
Yes, that's a great question. So yes, we don't have because of the way we invest, we do our international exposure that comes from like the fixed income side for portfolios that aren't in 100% equities. That fixed income, that revenue you're getting is actually coming from international sources, mostly in the Middle East through bonds called sukuk bonds. So they're coming from more from like a profit sharing and instead of like an interest accruing end.
Understood. Definitely want to open up the floor to any other questions that you guys may have. Thank you, Fahmin, for all the information that you shared tonight. And hopefully you guys got a lot of gems as well.
Of course. Do we have any other questions?
Yes. So one here is I have investments through other jobs and retirement. Are you guys able to pull them and use funds and transfer those over?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you actually go to one of our first slides, Rihanna, where we're talking about the different types of accounts, so what you're talking about, that would be a rollover IRA or a rollover Roth IRA, depending on how it's invested at your previous employer, where now you're no longer with them. So they're investing it the way you had it invested before you left. So basically it's just kind of it's on autopilot at this point. They're not rebalancing, you're not adding any monies to it. So you don't even know if it's staying compliant. So yes, because it's with the previous employer and you're no longer there, you can roll it over into an IRA, a rollover IRA, and we can do halal investments for you there. So previous employers are actually like the best way to make sure your investments are staying halal because you have more additional investment options too. But the most important thing is now you can really make sure that your investments are staying halal and it's not in just whatever fund they gave you, because that's what employers do. You have a set of funds that you can choose from, like this basket, and you have to choose from this basket that they give. You don't even have access to the open market.
Love that. I think a really important question that no one's asked so far is, are there any minimums required to invest in halal funds?
That is a great question. So if you want to go with the Amana or Wahed, they have like minimums like $100 or so, $150. But at Zenith, we don't have any minimums, which is one of the reasons why I really love being here and being a part of this firm, is because we don't gatekeep in the sense that like, nope, You don't have enough money, we're not going to service you. That's not our approach. Our goal is to make sure everyone has accessibility and is able to grow their wealth in a way that's appropriate for them, where we meet our clients where they are. So we don't say no, you're going to turn you away because you don't have an X amount.
Awesome. And then another huge question, what is the fees that are charged for halal funds?
So our flat fee is 1%. So for example, for easy math, if we have a $10,000 portfolio that we're managing for you, we're charging you $100 a year. So we're taking that out about quarterly, so it's about $25 a quarter. So our fee to manage is 1%. It's a flat 1%. However, I will add, we do use some of Amana, some of Wahed, and they have their expense ratios on the back end. But because of the small percentage we use in some of our portfolios, it's not necessarily the largest. So if you actually go over to the performance slide again, Rihanna. Oh yeah, right there. So you can see that on the back end of the holdings and the ETFs that we're using, ETFs and mutual funds that we're using, the expense ratio is 0.42. So it's not that's what the fees are on the back end of each ETF is charging. Well, that's not something that you're paying to us. That's what these holdings and these ETFs are charging on their end.
Hey, any more questions? I think it's going great. I'm going to ask another great question that no one's asked yet, is if they're interested in meeting with Fahmin, how can they schedule time with you?
That's a great question. Of course, can you drop a link in the chat? So anyone that wants to schedule some time, they'll get access to my calendar, and then, we can have a one-on-one conversation to discuss what your specific needs are. And if you haven't taken the financial fitness quiz, please take this a moment to do that as well. So, you can find out on your end, like, how are you doing overall? And, should you be talking to someone, or are you someone who is like a superstar? You're like, I'm good. I don't need to talk to anyone. But this is a great way to kind of just assess it on your own in a very quick few minutes to see if where you are, where do you stand as well.
Another question in the chat, what other financial services does Zenith offer?
That's a really good question as well. So we are a fee only firm. So what that means is we are a financial planning firm overall. So whenever we create a financial plan for you overall, you're only paying us for the financial plan that we're creating for you. So we have financial planning, that's one arm, and then we have investment management as a different arm. So we don't have we're not siloed in the sense that, oh, this is how much you need to have in order to become a client. Like, it's not a minimum goal, it's not a minimum AUM, assets under management, nothing like that. They're two different ones. You're welcome to, be an investment client and also be a financial planning client. We have some clients who are just financial planning, some are just investment only. So it really depends on what your needs are. It doesn't have to be that they have to coincide with each other, and it's not like a requirement. But we are a financial planning firm overall, so that is our greatest asset and advice that we are able to provide for you guys as well, giving you good quality financial advice to make sure you're making good 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 financial decisions to make sure you're secure and prepared for retirement and whatever your goals might be, whether it's, saving for a house or purchasing a home or saving for your kids' education. We're looking at it from all different aspects.
Okay, we have another question. So I know we talked about being compliant earlier, but how does Zenith stay up to date with changing regulations for halal investing?
That's a very interesting question as well. So the regulations for halal investments, they don't change in the sense that there are certain industries where you're not allowed to invest in, and that's never going to change. That's always been the same. Like for example, you could never own like Corona. You could never own Marlboro because those are prohibited sectors in the sense that like that's causing you harm. So a lot of the halal investments, it also looks at the kind of like an ESG perspective, making sure that it's not your investments aren't harming, either people health in a health wise or even in kind of in the world. So we don't invest in any kind of companies that are for, making weapons or, in prohibited sectors like gambling, pornography, or, tobacco, alcohol. So those things are never going to change. So that always stays the same. So what the way we stay up to date to make sure that your investments are compliant is by using Zoya because they're screening to make sure each investment, each individual company that you're invested in is they are not getting more than 30% of their revenue through interest, and they're also making sure that they're not in these prohibited industries.
Thank you so much. I think that's a perfect place to end it. Thank you so much, everybody who came tonight. This recording will be shared afterwards. Everybody have a great night.
And one more thing I also wanted to add as well is I myself I have investments with Zenith as well as we're creating our portfolios. It was a great avenue for me to make sure my investments are also staying halal as well. So I myself have my investments with our portfolios as well. And Alhamdulillah is doing really well.
Awesome. So make sure to definitely scan this financial fitness quiz and press the link in the chat to reach out to Fahmin. Great. Everybody have a
Thank you so much, guys. Assalamu alaikum.